great topic for you. This is a topic that I feel like doesn't get the attention that it deserves. It's a topic that is rarely discussed, never truly discussed by attorneys, divorce attorneys, or any attorneys that do domestic relations matters that I saw. Didn't find a bunch of research where it was something that was even contemplated by any attorneys, but it's what happens after divorce. So post divorce, you hear a lot of conversation about what needs to happen prior to divorce, how you need to prepare, what's going on as the divorce. You're in the throes of divorce. Those are you'll find a lot of research and you'll find a lot of resources about that. But what happens on the other side of divorce? That's important to know as well. And that's what today's topic is going to be about. So let's go ahead and dive right in. All right. So, a lot of times people spend years focused on getting a divorce, and maybe that's prior to filing. And even if they go into a divorce, we have clients where we have been in their cases for years, right? Divorce case, it might be a pretty complex case, might have a lot of assets to divide, might be, kids and child custody matters that are really, really complicated. It might be very litigious, right? Might be a great deal of, kind of, I would say combat or adversarial. But in those situations, yeah, sometimes you can expect to be in litigation for years. But what happens a lot of times, that is a smidgen of the time that you essentially will deal with your soon to be ex partner on the back end of the final divorce decree, which is where you'll spend the majority of your time, right? As exes as opposed to as partners, right? And so, I should say, correction, depends on how long you've been married. We do have gray divorces where folks have been married 40, 50 years and they're contemplating divorce for a myriad of reasons. So maybe in those situations, those would be the outliers, however. Okay. All right. So a lot of folks don't really think about life post divorce. And that's what we are going to talk about today. Okay. Just giving you a brief roadmap. We're going to cover what life after divorce looks like. That final divorce decree is issued. The financial fallout, the emotional fallout, if there are minor children involved, what's going on with the minor children, the logistics, right? Maybe of pickup, drop off, the lifestyle changes, right? So one parent or both parents might experience certain lifestyle changes, okay? What happens internally, psychologically, emotionally, to the parents? Same with to the children. The children are usually sometimes ignored in this process. A lot of times the parents are very focused on themselves and their need to dissolve the marriage and the relationship. And, the kids and their perspective is lost in all of this. So, we're going to address all of that tonight. Okay. All right. So, we're going to discuss the emotional adjustment, the financial transition, parenting changes, as well as the lifestyle changes. Okay. Now, there are a lot of divorce statistics. If you're going through a divorce, what I don't want you to do is feel like you are alone. Literally, throughout the United States on a yearly basis, thousands of folks file for divorce. You are not alone. Okay. So I don't want you to feel like you are alone. And then divorce is impacting millions of families. Okay. So again, you're not alone in this process. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the emotional realities of filing for divorce and what you can expect on the back end of it. Some people feel a sense of relief. Many people feel a sense of relief, right, on the back end of a divorce. But there is also the sadness, the anxiety, the loneliness, the fear, all right, the uncertainty. Those are things that are also felt, things that a lot of times are not addressed, right? because a lot of us are so focused on the goal of basically breaking up the marriage, right? Getting the assets, the things that deserving of, making sure that we get access to the children, making sure that we are getting alimony, child support, making sure that we're getting our attorney's fees. Those are the things a lot of times that are the focus of the divorce, right? And so people don't really think about some of the other things that are equally important when they are going through this process. So, one of the things that is not really discussed is your change in identity. Okay. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just say that you are a father, right? And you've always been in a nuclear family. You have always woken up to the sound of your children. You are always there to pick them up, off the bus after school. Let's say you're going through a divorce, and all of a sudden you are the non custodial parent. So you go from seeing your children every day, being very active and involved in their lives, to being a weekend warrior, seeing them every other weekend, depending on your parenting plan. Maybe you get first, third, and fifth weekends, okay? When there is a fifth weekend. And so that is can be a radical shift in your identity. Maybe you no longer see yourself as a father because what you thought of as a father, what you contemplated as as fatherhood, looked very different. And so you may have struggles with your identity and who you are post divorce. And the same can go for mothers, or a mother might feel like, hey, sees herself as a wife, right? And after this post divorce, that identity might be shattered, okay? And that can be very harmful, right? And if you're having identity issues on the eve of having a divorce, and you're already really grappling with anxiety, fear, uncertainty, to have an identity shift and go through an identity crisis, okay? Not really discussed, but something that you really need to think about and give some thought to, okay? Loss of routine on social circle changes, okay? That's something else that sometimes parents don't really contemplate. The adults in the relationship do not contemplate, okay? So the loss of routine, I kind of talked about this a little earlier. Maybe one parent puts the kids on the school bus every day. They no longer get to do that post divorce. Maybe one parent does homework with minor children every day. That doesn't happen post divorce anymore. Maybe you as a couple, y'all had date nights on Thursdays. That does not happen. You laid in the bed together at 10 p.m. every night and talked about one another's days. That doesn't happen anymore. You contemplated your future together, what retirement together might look like. You took monthly vacations or quarterly vacations together. All of those things are disruptive to your routine. You're going to have to create new routines. That is going to essentially cause a problem, and it might even cause a problem with your identity. And you see how some of this stuff can cause other problems in other areas. All right. Your social circle changes. Many married couples spend time with other married couples. All right. And so as you guys move toward divorce, you might lose some of those friendships, right? Or you might move in different circles than your soon to be ex moves in. Okay. And so you're experiencing again a shift. And we're gonna talk a little bit about lifestyle changes, but that's a shift in like kind of the interpersonal dynamics. All right. And so that can be difficult, right? All right. So let's talk a little bit about what happens to the children. I've discussed a little bit about what happens with adults. I want to talk about what goes on with the kids. All right. Especially then again, we're focusing on post divorce. All right. We're not talking about during the divorce. So this is when the parenting schedules begin. All right. And the child exchanges really begin. And this is where I think that parents, their patience is usually tried because you're on the cusp of you're on essentially the back end of a divorce where maybe your divorce was, really adversarial. So there might still be animosity. Let's be honest. There probably still is animosity between you and your spouse. And so when we're doing these exchanges, you're dropping the kids off, pickups and drop offs, it might break your heart to see your former spouse. Maybe they have a new romantic interest, okay? Or maybe you just, their face is very punchable, right? And so when you see them, you have to restrain yourself, okay? So all of that creates challenges when it comes to parenting, right? Co-parenting, I should say. All right. And so parenting schedules, child exchanges, as well as school coordination. Right, so things are going on at the school. Sometimes what usually has to happen, if there is a parent teacher conference, one person might sit on one side of the room, one parent might sit on the other side of the room, and the parents will have to interact independently with teachers, doctors, etc. Simply because they are not amicable. They cannot really maybe be in the same room. In the live I talked about, they cannot maybe be in the same zip code as one another, right? They just have, they have challenges being near one another, and so coordinating is going to be tough, right? It's going to be a challenge, right? And then of course the emotional adjustment for the kids and contemplating everything I just talked about. The kids have to adjust emotionally as well. They may not be used to seeing their parents fight, or sometimes they are very used to seeing their parents fight, right? But all of these things are happening. The drop-offs, pickups, the stuff at the school, and this is all the things that you have to really contemplate on the back end of that divorce, when it comes to really, really parenting children and thinking about some of these lifestyle changes and what it's going to do in terms of logistics as well. So children oftentimes need stability, they need routine, and they need reassurance when they are going through this process. As you can imagine, you as an adult, you feel how you feel, but your son or your daughter loves that other parent, right? They adore that other parent. You may not feel that way about that other parent, but that is not their experience. And so, in order to, because this process is harder on them than most folk realize going through divorce, it is something that should be contemplated because the children have no real voice in this, right? They are not usually asked how they would feel if the parents were to be divorced, and how it would impact them. Even if they were asked, they may not have the words to articulate it well. All right, especially given their age and how sophisticated they are, right? So those are things you want to be mindful of as parents. The more peaceful that co-parenting is, the better your children are, better off they are going to be. All right. Now, some of the living situation changes, and I really kind of alluded to some of these things, but the reality is one household becomes two. And with that, usually at least one parent takes some kind of oath of poverty when it comes to divorce, right? And so usually what that involves is someone is moving, right? It can mean that both parties are moving. It depends on your situation. Maybe there was a house, maybe that house went up for sale, maybe it got sold, the proceeds got split, and everybody went on their merry way, right? Maybe neither of you have the credit to purchase new homes, so you might both be moving into apartments. Maybe one person stayed in the home, and the home is being, there's a divorce refinance that's happening, so that one parent can get their payout and they can shove off. Okay. And so only one parent is leaving. But maybe one parent is leaving with half the furniture. Okay. So maybe both parents have to not only move, or one parent, but they're also going to have to purchase new furniture. That is an expense. Okay. That's something else you have to think about, the expenses. So the expenses of moving, hiring a moving company, the expenses of getting a new place, right? Let's just say you get an apartment and they want the first and last month's rent plus the deposit, the expense of kicking off all those utilities, right? And so, I hope that your credit looks good enough for you to, basically get into an apartment in a nice neighborhood, right? Because if you don't have the credit, then you know what community you're going to end up in. Okay. And so these are things that you're going to have to contemplate if you're going through the divorce process. And this is just something that a lot of folks, just being honest with you, they don't really think about. Okay. All right. So the other thing is going to be downsizing, right? So you're going from in many instances, a two-income household to a one-income household. All right. So that is going to impact what your lifestyle looks like moving forward. Right. So y'all might have taken money and put all the bills in one pot, put all the money in one pot and addressed everything. But now that's no longer happening. All right. Some of the debt might have been divided in the equitable division of the not just the property, but of the debt as well. And so you have the other added expense of the debt that has been accrued, trying to get a new place, moving, utilities. All right. And so, and then of course, there is always the living alone part, right? So one party might live alone, both parties might live alone, right? If there are no minor children. And so these are things that many people don't discuss or really talk about post divorce, okay? And this is something that really needs to, you really need to think about. And let's just talk about some of that again. I mentioned this briefly, the financial reality that you really, really, really have to give some thought to. Separate bills. If there are children involved, that non-custodial parent is going to be paying child support, depending on how many kids that is. Right? That's going to be a big chunk coming out of your paycheck, right? Where you might not have had that expense or you didn't at least see that expense before. You were paying money, but you didn't pay your pro rata share to the custodial parent before. This is new. All right. So sometimes people get alimony, you get hit with alimony, child support, they get hit with attorney's fees. All of these things can really eat and impact your budget. So you have to contemplate a new budget as a single person, right? When I say single person, I mean living as an adult, and not as a tandem of adults under one household. All right. And so with that, not just the lifestyle changes, but we were also talking about the financial changes that you are going to experience. And so when I talked about that oath of poverty, this is what I was talking about. Okay. All right. So there is research to basically out there suggesting that for people who go through divorce, they are generally financially impacted in an adverse way. Okay. And is pretty unavoidable. All right. Again, especially if you're coming from a two-income household and going down to a one-income household. And so that's going to impact your net worth. It's going to impact what your debt to income ratio might look like as well. Now, here's some other things to think about. Uh, the division. So we talked about the equitable division. We talked a little bit about some gray marriages. People are getting divorced a little later in life. People have been married 30, 40 years are now getting divorced. In those instances, you're talking about, and not just those instances, but in marriages that might last over, let's just say 5, 10, 20 years, you're talking about dividing up the retirement. Okay. So if your retirement is impacted in a negative way, let's say that your retirement is slashed in half, right? So you went from having $100,000 in your retirement, it was divided in a divorce, cut so that you receive 50, the other party receives 50, and you had plans to retire, let's just say in the next 15 years. Now you might have to push that back a little bit, all right? Because you lost 50% of your retirement. $100,000 is not a lot to retire on, obviously, at least not in the United States. But that's something else that you want to think about, okay? Because that's absolutely going to impact your long-term financial goals. All right. So we're talking about net worth and debt. And so credit card debt, right? So some of the individual credit card debt might be divided up. Mortgage obligations, which we talked about a little bit earlier. If you're both on the mortgage, maybe one party is going to have to try to do a divorce refinance to get you off, all right, the mortgage, get you off of the property and to give you your equitable share. All right. Maybe if your credit doesn't look like it did 15, 20 years ago, it might be difficult for you to get another house, right? Or it might be difficult to do the refinance to get you off of the house, which means that the property might have to be sold, and both of your credit might be, in the sewer, right? Because of, life. And so those things are going to impact your living situation as well as your lifestyle. This is the stuff that's waiting for you on the other side of this divorce that you really have to think about, and really prepare yourself for, that I find many folk aren't really they aren't really up to speed on what life after divorce, after that final divorce decree is issued by the judge. So there's also vehicle refinancing. Sometimes people are on the installment loan. They are authorized users on credit cards. They'll have to come off of it. They'll have to come off of their former spouses, their car. That might need to be sold off. And that might impact again what your transportation looks like. And you might have some serious transportation needs. Credit score concerns. And I talked a little bit about that a few minutes ago, right? One of the things that you may need to do is you need to monitor your credit. You absolutely need to be monitoring your credit before the divorce, during the divorce, after the divorce. You might want to put locks on your credit. Make sure that um, folks. Sometimes I've seen marriage couples engage, or soon to be ex spouses, engage in fraud, right? They may open up accounts in their ex's name or soon to be ex's name because they have your credentials, they have your social security number, your birthday, all that information, right? So, monitoring your credit, right? Being vigilant regarding your credit. These are things that you will need to do as you are thinking about divorce and even on the other side of divorce, right? All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about some of the legal issues that people oftentimes forget about, that happen post divorce. One of the things that people should be doing is they should be updating their beneficiaries, and we see this when it comes to insurance plans. Okay, so if you got the divorce, that spouse is should no longer be your beneficiary unless you guys are amicable and you want them to be the beneficiary, but you might want to change them as the beneficiary if you guys are no longer married. Estate planning also needs to be addressed, and just talked about some of the insurance policies. The parenting plan. These are the type of legal issues or concerns folks usually have post divorce. Is addressing what's going on with the parenting plan. They may or may not be happy with how visitation is set up, and then child support enforcement is another legal issue we generally see post divorce. All right. Now, here are some of the common problems that we see after divorce. One parent is not following the parenting plan. And then, of course, one parent might be missing child support payments. What we like to, again, tell our non custodial parents is if one parent is engaging, the other parent is engaging in parental alienation or interference with their visitation, do not, as a consequence, withhold child support, okay? Because you're not going to get any sympathy from a judge. You are not going to get any sympathy from the court by withholding child support. That is not a remedy for what's going on with your visitation. You need to go ahead and file a contempt, right? And see if you can get the judge to intervene and address what's going on with the parenting. But withholding child support is not the answer. Okay. Communication breakdowns, which often happen. Let's be honest, guys. After divorce, wounds are very fresh. Okay, so it's going to be challenging sometimes for people to stand in the same room with someone that they may have loved so intensely, cared for so intensely, and felt maybe betrayed by or hurt by, and talk about school schedules, right? Or hurt in the kids' extracurricular activities, right? And so it's understandable that folks might experience some kind of communication breakdowns. But for the sake of the kids, it's best if the parties can persevere. Sometimes it's best to bring in a third party, right? Maybe a grandparent that can help facilitate this, things like exchanges and visitation. Dating conflicts is another. Sometimes folks are not really ready to see their partner move on romantically. It can be very, very hard, very, very challenging to deal with. But also, what we see, and sometimes this is addressed in the parenting plan, we see where one parent, eh, they are skittish about their former spouse's dating choices, and so, it might be in the parenting plan that no adult that is not related to the former spouse and not that former spouse's actual marriage partner can stay in the home overnight when the minor children or child is present. Okay. And so dating conflicts sometimes can surface. And I'll come back to that and revisit that here in a second. The other thing is social media problems. And this is pretty standard stuff. Folks hop on social media problems, hop on social media, and they kind of bleed all over all the platforms, and just use it to, as a stream of consciousness about everything that their former spouse did wrong, and make accusations, allegations, and so it can make co-parenting very difficult, or it can just make really trying to heal post divorce. It can make it the process a lot more lengthy and difficult. Okay. All right. Now, healthy ways. I wanted to cover a few healthy ways to adjust after divorce. The number one way, and this is what we tell our clients, is to think about therapy. In addition to counseling, we strongly recommend seeing a therapist. Um, Many of our clients can really benefit from seeing a therapist. I know that they many need therapy going through divorce, because they will talk to us about some of their emotional concerns, some of their psychological concerns, and it would be best if they sat with a mental health professional, best if they sat with a spiritual advisor, that could really, really address, some of their issues, or concerns. And I say that because no matter what attorney you choose, unless they are licensed attorneys and therapists, you're going they're going to do you a disservice, right? It's the equivalent of going to your therapist to resolve your legal issues, right? Or going to a medical doctor to resolve your legal issues. They could probably give some advice. It's probably not going to be sound advice, all right? And so we can certainly listen, and we're great listeners. However, there are probably going to be some action items that you should think about doing so that you can begin to grieve properly and to heal properly. Okay, and your attorneys are just not going to provide that to you. So therapy and counseling is number one. Financial planning is number two for all the reasons I discussed. Like, for example, your retirement might be in shambles. You need a new budget, right? More than likely, as a single person, especially if you're coming from a two-income family or a two-income household, you're going to have to create a new budget. A financial planner is going to be great to assist you with that. The other thing I see is, many people spiral following divorce. It's one of those life events, kind of up there with bankruptcy and death, that can really cripple and paralyze people, right? And so it's going to be good to engage in self care, one of the best ways to engage in self-care is to work out, right? To go to the gym, get a trainer, right? Do Pilates, right? That type of stuff. Go for walks. That's going to be the best remedy. Okay. And then of course get good support systems, your church, family members, friends, to really help you through the process. And then lastly, just if you can, just being in a healthy co-parenting situation, so that you don't have you're already going through all of this other stuff. You don't want the added stress of basically being in a bad co-parenting situation. It just makes things so much worse. Okay. And so co-parenting realities, if you do have kids that you're going to be going through on this other side of the divorce, is there going to be shared holidays, right? You're going to have to figure this stuff out. Your parenting plan might address some of it, but there's still, very much the logistics that have to be worked around, even with a very clear parenting plan. School events, the kids' routines, new routines for yourself. Okay. And if you're having difficulty co-parenting, sometimes they don't, there are folks who don't want the other parent to have their contact information. You can use there are communication apps out there, co-parenting apps out there like Our Family Wizard, that you can communicate with the other co-parent in, and it will keep basically it'll keep you can archive your communications. So if there's ever a problem where you have to kind of produce any of those communications as evidence in court, maybe because of domestic abuse, you guys you just can't do the telephone and text. That is a great app to assist with basically monitoring communication between the parties when it comes to the kids. Okay. And then there's going to be new relationships, right? And so you're going to form new relationships with your children, not as a tandem or as a team anymore, but as an individual parent, right? And so that's going to be new, and that's going to be different and unique. And you do have to get ready for that. All right. Let's talk really quickly as we begin wrapping up about some of the biggest mistakes we see people make after divorce. One is just going to be posting online, right? Again, going on these emotional rants, talking about their former spouse, and for all the reasons you can imagine, it's just a bad idea. Another number two would be violating court orders. Sometimes kids are used as pawns, right? In the co-parenting wars, all right, where maybe one spouse is still hurting, they haven't healed. One of the easiest ways to injure another parent is going to be impacting their relationship with the other child, with the children, right? So you'll see parental alienation, you'll see parental interference when it comes to visitation. This is the kind of stuff that we see in these types of cases where folks are unhealed, or sometimes people are just unhinged. And it's unfortunate because a lot of times we will make our way back into court post divorce because of it, right? Using children as leverage. Another thing we see sometimes is ignoring finances. Maybe one parent wasn't good at budgeting. Maybe one parent did all the budgeting. Okay. And so one parent just kind of just maybe spirals financially because they just didn't think about life post divorce, what that's going to look like in terms of the budget. The other is going to be one party or one parent dating very recklessly. Okay. So I talked a little bit about a parenting plan that addresses overnights with folks that are not related to the former spouse or and not their spouse. Sometimes this dating recklessly part, especially because loneliness. I talked a little bit about loneliness a bit earlier. It can lead people to make bad choices. Those choices can absolutely impact your kid's safety, right? So you want to think about that, and just impact your co-parenting. And so you want to be mindful of that. So you want to date, of course, with purpose when you do decide to jump back into the dating market. All right, this is some times when you might need an attorney again. If there's going to be modifications to the child custody plan, or the parenting plan, contempt actions where there's contempt, child support enforcement issues. We can come in and assist with things like that. and then a custody changes. Okay. And so our firm can deal with divorce modifications, custody support, enforcement, as well as modifying parenting plans. All right, guys. Well, I thank you for joining us. If you do need a consultation, you can give us a call at 404 999 9529 or 478 845 1213. We also have a lot of other videos here on YouTube, long form videos. Check them out. We cover pretty much most topics, family law, divorce, as well as criminal law. Okay. And they are very, very helpful and very, very useful. We put these things out here for your consumption, for public consumption. All right. We know that everyone can't necessarily um, uh, hire an attorney. And so, however, there might be information that you find valuable, that you wish if you could sit with an attorney, that might pass along to you. And so, we want to make sure that we do our due diligence on providing resources that are going to be helpful to the community. Also, go to our website www.chicago-wilkersonlaw.com. You'll find a lot of blogs that are great reads and great information on all of these topics, especially if you're curious about specific topics. You're going through a divorce, you're going through, child custody modification. We write about all that stuff. In addition to that, make sure that you like and follow, not just here on YouTube, because we do a certain announcements, but make sure you like and follow also on our other social media platforms. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And then make sure that you tune in to purchase our books. And you can go to the link in our bio. This is Divorce, Death by a Thousand Cuts, available on Amazon, and Child Custody War, both available on Amazon. Both are, I think, under $30, both hardcover. A lot of great information here. So even if you can't retain an attorney, most people can, afford $30 and grab one of those books. You can find the books if you hit the link in our bio. You can find also you'll find a ebook on divorce, which is absolutely free. You can check that out as well. Okay. Well, I thank you for joining us, guys. We will see you next time. Make sure you tune in to Monday Night Live on Instagram and Facebook Live at 9 p.m. And then our webinars on Instagram and Facebook that we have usually on Wednesdays or Thursdays around noon to 12:30, where we cover topics like family law and family law divorce and criminal defense as well. Okay, guys. All right. We'll see you next time. I'm Genghis Khan, and I'm signing off.